Whoever is team one, it's 9:06. You're on. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So my group did Chinese mythology. Um, so in the beginning, um, the creation myth is that there was chaos in an egg, and from this egg, Pangu was born, and he had two horns, two tusks, and a hairy body. And this was like around 18,000 years ago. He broke through it with an axe, and he split um, yin and yang apart. And so the top half of the egg became the sky and heaven, and the bottom half of the egg became the earth. And depending on the story, some stories credit him with like setting the sun, the moon, stars, and planets in place, as well as dividing the four seas. And he shaped the earth and made valleys and like stacked up the mountains.
In another legend, it claims that the universe was created from Pangu's corpse. His eyes became the sun and moon, his blood and sweat became rivers, his hair became the trees and plants, and his body became the soil. It's also said that the human race evolved from parasites living on Pangu's body. In this version, Pangu was depicted as a dwarf clothed with leaves.
All right, so characteristics is that he is the first living being, and also the creator of the world. He emerged from an egg containing the entire cosmos. He's depicted as short, stout, and completely covered in hair. He has a human face and also rounded horns. He's also sometimes aided by his celestial friends, and he has no children or familial relations. He's either depicted as holding a hammer and a chisel or a sun and moon in his hands, and he's associated with the concept of yin and yang.
So Nua is the goddess that's credited as the creator of all mankind. The story goes that one day the goddess was on a stroll and she was overwhelmed with loneliness. As a result, she began to craft chickens and sheep out of clay. And when she was inspired by her own reflection, she decided to create people from clay as well. And the legend goes that the highborn nobles were descendants of the people that Nua crafted by hand, whereas the working class were created from figures that Nua made from spitting mud around her head with a rope. And an alternate myth depicts Nua and her brother Fuxi as the last of mankind. They realized that they needed to repopulate, but they were hesitant because they were siblings. So they were given a test by heaven, and each were to climb a mountain and build a fire. If the smoke intertwined, they were to be married and to repopulate the earth. So since the smoke did intertwine, the two ended up together and continued the human race.
So besides the myth of creating humankind, Nuwa was also she featured a large part in a different myth, which was mending the pillars of heaven. And so, essentially, what happened was that the god of water and the god of fire had a fight to determine the ruler of heaven. And so, the god of water lost the battle, and so he became really upset, and he bashed his head against one of the pillars, and so the earth started trembling, and the pillars were collapsing, and it ripped a large hole in the sky. And so Earth was also already in ruins because of the battle. And so when Nuwa heard her children suffering, then she ran to help them. And so she begged the sky turtle owl to grant her a miracle. And so what they did was they cut off his four legs and they used those to replace the four pillars. And then Nuwa gathered five colored stones, which I think were supposed to represent the five elements, and she melted them together, and she used them to fix the hole in the sky. But she couldn't get the sky and the earth aligned perfectly, so the earth became tilted, and so this was the reason, this was their explanation for why all of the rivers in China run in a southeastern direction. And so this myth has two alternate endings. In one version, after fixing the sky and the pillars, then Nuwa she basically laid down and died of exhaustion. In a different version, she discovered that they didn't have enough stone to fix the sky, and so she sacrificed herself to fill in the last pieces.
And another major figure was Fuxi, and he was considered one of the first heroes in Chinese mythology. He's also the brother or husband of Nua, and so his face was like a human, but his body was shaped like a snake. However, Fuxi was like considered a really kind god because he cared for the humans a lot. So, for example, there was a day where the humans were starving, and so he taught them how to hunt fish with their hands. But then there was this dragon king who lived under the water, and he was unhappy because the humans were eating his subjects. So then Fuxi came up with like another idea. So instead of using their hands, he made a nest instead to catch the fish. And this angered the dragon king even more, and his eyes popped out like fish eyes. Another contribution that he made was the invention of the writing system and the domestication of animals, preserving meat. He also invented like preserving meat and smelting metal. And he also created the bagua, or the 8 trigrams, and they represented the 8 fundamental principles of life. And there were continuous lines that represented male aspects, and then there are also broken lines that represented female aspects, and they complement each other to like bring balance to each other. So you can see that Fuxi was pretty connected to humans because of his efforts to bring civilization and benefits to humanity.
So the Chinese creation myths uh, share the same idea of like chaos and before the creation of the universe with the Greek myths and the Big Bang Theory. And Pengu's birth is especially similar to the Big Bang Theory. And the idea of yin and yang and chaos versus order in Pengu's story, it's a similar idea used in Chinese Taoism. And the bagua used in Chinese Buddhism and feng shui is still used today.
So we also see a lot of parallels between Greek mythology and Chinese mythology in especially, I think, the creation of humans. They both share the idea that humans were made out of clay or like made from the earth, because as we know, in one myth, the gods created humans from different metals. In another myth, Prometheus made humans from clay, and so they kind of share the idea that we were created from the earth, which is like our greatest provider. I mean, it gives us everything we need to survive, and so I think it makes sense that they would assume that that's where we came from. And also, they share the idea that we were sort of created in the image of the gods.
Um, the status of gods was also similar. Like the gods could be depicted as both animal and human, which is similar to like the Greek and Egyptian myths. Um, Nuwa was similar to Hera because she was like the goddess of like marriage. Zeus and Hera were brother and sister, like Nuwa and Fushi. Um, and the myths also serve as a reminder that like we hold the gods to a different standard than like humans. For example, humans as humans we can't marry our siblings.
There was also, I think, a lot of parallels to connections between the gods and nature, like both the Greeks and the Chinese. They had myths to explain things that happen in nature.
Hey
For
guys.
example,
All right, it's 9:16, so I have to have the next team go. Thank you
alright.
very much. Go ahead, team 2, just go ahead and share.
So hello everybody. Our project is on Mayan mythology. Next slide. Okay, so just to start off, we wanted to ask you guys the question of like, what do you know about Mayan culture so far? If you want to raise your hands.
I know that there was like alien paintings somewhere.
Okay, anybody else?
The world
Okay, then
almost
we'll move
ended.
on next. Oh,
They
yeah, go
said
ahead.
the world was gonna end in 2012. Well, they didn't say that just because of the Mayan calendar, right?
Yeah, so we're actually going to talk about the calendars later on. Okay, next slide. So we're going to show you a creation video right now.
When you shared the screen, you had to make sure you clicked sharing video. This way it also includes the sound. So you might want to unshare and then reshare and click at the bottom where it says like optimize for video.
I just shared the sound. Thank you.
Which did not satisfy the gods. They decided to create more complex beings, men, to properly worship them. The first men were made out of clay and crumbled upon creation, and the second form of men were made out of wood and were able to walk and talk, but had no mind or heart and couldn't praise the gods properly. The gods sent down a flood to destroy them and told the animals to attack the survivors. The few that escaped ran to the woods and became monkeys.
TPU and Gukamots did not know what to make the men out of until some animals brought the gods white corn, which the gods grounded into a paste and formed 4 men out of it, who were able to walk and talk and had complex minds and feelings. Their first action was to worship and praise the gods for their lives. They described how they can see all creations and understand it all as well, to which the gods felt they created these men too well and that they should not be able to see as well as the gods do. They removed some of their vision and their understanding of the world weakened. The men continued to praise the gods and live on the land along with the 4 women that TPU and Gukamots created. And these women were the ancestors of all Kishi men and women today, where their sight and understanding of the world is still not perfect.
So why do we study creation myths? Well, first of all, understanding the creation myth of people is crucial for understanding their religion and worldview. This is the case because myths are spheres of symbolic expression through which ancient people tried to explain the physical world around them, as well as the paradoxes of the human existence. Studying myths can also help us understand modern religion. Elements from Mayan myths still survive in Christianity in modern-day Mexico. When anthropologists claim that their religious ceremonies and rituals are survivals of their ancestors. And examples of this include animal sacrifice during church ceremonies and the cult of the Black Christ, known as Señor de Tila, who is a fusion of Christ and the ancient deity Ikal. In the Mayan creation story, destruction happens in the form of a flood, a theme that aligns Mayan myth with the biblical tradition and other cultures around the world. Mesopotamian, Hindu, Tibetan, all have this element of a great flood. Now the question is, why did all these cultures that developed independently of one another have this flood element in common? Could it be that there was actually a global deluge that submerged the Earth at one point? What do you guys think?
Well, I personally believe that there was a global flood.
Well, according to geologists, there's actually no evidence to support the theory of a global deluge. There is, however, conclusive evidence of considerable regional flooding around the last ice age when glaciers melted and caused the sea level to rise and flood coastal areas, as you can see in this animation down here. And survivors must have passed on the story of the flood, which found its way to their mythology. In the Mayan myth, the gods created people to praise and worship them, and this idea of the creator needing recognition has parallels with other cultures. In the Islamic esoteric tradition, for example, a famous philosopher called Ibn Arabi postulated that God created the universe, including humans, to reflect his own grandeur. The idea is that when God is projected beyond his divine being, it becomes apparent and recognizable. The Mayan gods also needed creatures with limited knowledge, which is why they destroyed those who saw and knew too much. The negotiation of how much knowledge to allow humans is present in Greek mythology too. Like, for example, Zeus denied humans fire, which stands for knowledge and reason. And the cyclical structure of the Mayan creation story also reflects an essential theme of their mythology, which is that the world is periodically being created and destroyed. This is a basic concept in Mayan worldview where destruction is positive and meaningful because it happens for the sake of renovation. Another theme is the importance of corn in Mayan culture. In the final cycle of creation, people were made of ground corn, and this is such an important crop to the Mayans that it found its way to their mythology, and also illustrates how their myths both reflected and reinforced the central themes of their everyday life. And this brings us to the next part of our presentation.
So some of the main gods that they had in Mayan mythology were Itzamna, which is a creation god, the sun god, which is associated with the rulers because they were referred to as Kinich Ahu, and then the one god or the main god. So knowing all this, can any of you relate it to like a different culture's mythology or even a religion that we know today? Okay, Eamon, can you click one more time? Okay, so there is parallels with Egyptian mythology because both the Mayans and the Egyptians believed that the rulers were associated with the sun god or one of their main gods. And there's an important like note for Christianity because they're actually not sure if Hunabku, which was the one god, the main god, was used by the Spanish to force Christianity onto the Mayans, or if they actually thought of him themselves. Next slide.
So the next three most important gods were the maize god, rain god, and forest god. And I was going to have a discussion, but since the video took a little bit more time, I'm just going to go over it. So the Mayans were very into agriculture. Scientists were actually so impressed that they were able to survive in a rainforest landscape. And agriculture was the only way they could sustain their society. And that's why like even the people were made out of corn. Next slide. So I'm going to give like 20 seconds for everyone to read this poem, and I want everyone to pay attention to how to connect it to the fertility goddess and calendars. All right, so the reason why I highlighted moon and happiness was because the Mayans believed in these cycles of happiness and destruction. And that was why they believed that calendars were so important. They would actually have priests go and interpret these calendars and kind of foresee the future and decide when to host events. And while it's not necessarily integral to our culture today, we still have horoscopes, and that's kind of the idea behind the connection between Mayan belief in astrology, the connection between astrology and luck.
So I also wanted to point out from like a critical theory feminism point of view, the only main god
Sorry,
that's
Elizabeth,
actually a goddess.
guys, I have to cut you off. It's 9:26. So we're ready for team 3.
Okay, so hi, we're group 3 and we did the Japanese creation story.
So we're going to start off by showing a video of the very beginning of Japanese mythology. Stanley, can you play the video?
I think we're having a little bit of audio problems.
Same thing when you shared your screen, did you check the bottom box that says that you need to share a video?
High up to create the masculine yo, heaven. The rich, heavy yoke, much more complicated, sank later, spreading and hardening to become the feminine Io, earth. From Io and Yo came 7 generations of male deities, the Nomikoto, and for the 8th generation they created Izanagi and Izanami, the receptive couple, the ones who invite. Their offspring were many and beautiful. Their firstborns became the 8 islands dotting the Sea of Japan. They gave birth to mountains and rivers and waterfalls, mists and forests and fields. Their children were the ancestors of trees and of plants, of birds and fish, and of all the creatures. When Izanagi washed his eyes in the clear waters of a flowing stream, the sun was born, and the moon. And when their first human child, Ohohirome, Great Noon, was born, so radiant was she that they lifted her up to the heaven as sun helper. Then they made the wind to blow away the mists from the land, allowing the sun to illuminate the 6 corners of the world, north, south, east, west, above, and below.
Okay, so two important figures of Japanese mythology are Izanagi and Izanami. They're the ones who created the islands of Japan by using a spear to stir the ocean. This is a picture I drew just to show just that. There's more information about Izanagi and Izanami that will be covered in the next slide.
Okay, so Izanami and Izanagi were the 8th pair of gods to be born from the heavens, and they're considered to be the central figures of the Japanese creation myth. By stirring the ocean with a jeweled spear, they created Onogoro, the first island in Japan, and their first attempts to have children actually ended up in failure, and those children ended up becoming the rest of the Japanese islands. Eventually, after giving birth to the god of fire, Kagetsuchi, Izanami, the female god, passed away from her burns, which leads into our next slide.
Okay, since there's so many different adaptations of the stories, because there isn't any true founders, for our version that we chose to focus on was how the idea of the underworld was introduced. So after Izanami's death from childbirth, Izanagi traveled to the land of the dead Yomi, right? His objective was to bring back his wife, but when he saw her, he was frightened by her decaying appearance. So he ran out of the underworld and, embarrassed, and Izanami chased him. But then when they reached the entrance of the land of the living, Izanagi blocked it with a great stone, forever separating the land of the dead from the land of the living. And at that point, Izanami threatened Izanagi, saying that she would kill 1,000 people every day, and Izanagi replied that he would father 1,500 for every 1,000 she killed. So this kind of brings up the connection of how more people are given birth a day than people are being killed.
After leaving the underworld, Izanagi was cursed of the impurities of the underworld. To purify himself, he had to cleanse himself in the oceans. After cleansing himself, he gave birth to the 3 major gods. Omi Kami, the goddess of the sun and the ancestress of the imperial family, formed from his left eye. From the right eye is Tsukuyomi no Mikoto, the god of the moon, and from his nose was Susanoo, the god of tricks and storms.
Okay, so Shinto belief is a polytheistic religion that follows these creation myths. They believe that humans were considered good while the cause of evil was from evil spirits. So uh, hereditarily, humans were born pure.
The Shintos called their gods kami. They were basically sacred spirits which take on the form of important concepts of life, such as the wind, nature, and sun. The four basic beliefs of Shintoism is tradition and family, which is the understanding that family is the foundation of maintaining tradition, love of nature, holding nature sacred, ritual purity, cleansing oneself physically and spiritually before entering shrines, and matsuri, which is worshiping and honoring gods and ancestral spirits.
Okay, so since there are no founders of Shinto belief, there are so many different versions of the creation myths. Like some alternative stories, like have the islands being created at once with Onogo when Izanagi dipped his spear into the water. But then, if you look through a structuralist lens, all these different versions of creation myths have common aspects that allow us to understand their certain effects on society. Like one specific effect is that the kamis created everything. They create the sun, the moon, the animals, even the mountains. So due to this, people that follow Shintoism and these myths believe that they were meant to worship the gods and appreciate them. But then another common element is the story in the stories is Amaterasu, the sun goddess. She is seen as an ancestor of the imperial family, creating this divinity for the emperor and the palace. So and this affected Japanese culture and society because it caused them to worship the emperor as a way of worshiping the kamis and the gods. They would even like do state offerings in the past and prayers towards the imperial family because they believed it was their way of worshiping the gods.
So in Shintoism, both men and women were allowed to become priests. However, women were given an important role of becoming miku or shrine maidens. They basically serve as messengers of the will of the kami. During ancient times, they were an essential social figure that had influence over social and political life. Due to their bond with the kami, they had to remain pure, which meant they couldn't get married. However, if shrine maidens were to get married, they could still serve the shrine, but as priestess instead. In this religion, there was basically no gender imbalance, and both men and women were given equal opportunities to participate in this religion.
So connections to history in the world. Like Eddie stated before, in Shintoism, the Emperor of Japan and his family were believed to be descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu. During the Meiji Restoration period, Shintoism and its creation myth were made to be the official state religion of Japan. And this is partly because they want to separate Buddhism from Japanese culture and society. And they want to do that because they want the country to be unified under one main religion. And the most obvious way this affected the rest of the world was that Shintoism helped unify the Japanese people under the imperial family, specifically during the World Wars. All right, so now we're going to do a quiz. Question one, true or false, death is considered an impurity. Anyone want to answer?
False.
Actually, this question is true because being born is considered pure for humans. So dying essentially for them is considered impure. Question number two, who were the three gods born from Izanagi's purification? And these are the from these options.
Is it D?
That's correct. Yeah, it was Susanoo, Amaterasu, and Tsukuyomi. Next slide. Question number three. What generation of gods were Izanami and Izanagi from? The first, the last, the eighth, or the fourth?
The first.
Okay, sorry guys, it's 9:36.
Thanks.
Good morning, class. We're gonna start off a video that we made ourselves and animated on the story, on the Babylonian creation story called the Numa Elish. Our story starts with two bodies of water swirling in chaos, one fresh and one salty. Apsu, the fresh body of water, and Tiamat, the salty body of water. Together to give birth to younger gods, but issues arise. Apsu devises a plan to kill his kin, but backfires when Ea, his eldest son, kills him in his sleep. Tiamat is enraged and seeks help from Kingu. He receives the Tablets of Destiny. In fury, Tiamat creates 11 monsters with the same purpose, to go to war with the younger gods.
Hearing about Tiamat's monstrous army, composed of the viper, the sphinx, the lion, the mad dog, the scorpion man, and the ferocious leader Kingu, strengthened by the Tablets of Destiny, Ea became fearful. Ea looked at his grandfather Anshar for help, telling him about Tiamat's undestroyable army who was currently marching to heaven to avenge Aspu's death. Anshar appointed Marduk as their only savior. Marduk was the grand creation of Ea and the goddess Damkina. It was noted that his eyes flashed with lightning and his mouth breathed fire when he spoke. Combined with his fearlessness, he was truly a being to be frightened of. Named the Great Sun, Marduk was brought forth and was told to defeat Tiamat's army. However, Marduk agreed to do so upon one condition. After the war, he shall be deemed supreme god, ruler of all the universe. Every god agreed.
Armed with a royal scepter, bow and arrow, mace, and command of the four winds, Marduk heads off in his chariot to fight and enrage Tiamat. Marduk traps Tiamat with his net and attacks her with the fierce ones. Tiamat attempts to swallow Marduk, but he hurls a whirlwind down Tiamat's throat, briefly stunning her. Seizing this moment, Marduk grabs his bow and arrow and pierces Tiamat's heart, splitting her into two. One piece became the heavens, and the other became the earth. Following Tiamat's defeat, Marduk swiftly defeats Kingu and imprisons her allies. With his mace, Marduk smashes Tiamat's skull, and the north wind carries off her blood in celebration.
With Tiamat defeated, Marduk sets out to create the world. He appoints Nebru to fix the star intervals, creating the constellations. He appoints Nanar, the night, gifting him a crown to shine over the land. With this, he creates the cycles of the moon. The clouds are created from Tiamat's foam, and her tears become the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. Half of her body is used to create the earth. Binding the 11 monsters from Tiamat's army to his feet, Marduk creates images of them to place by the gates of Apsu. The gods bow down to him, addressing him as their king.
Guilty for instigating warfare, Kingu is killed, and from his blood Ea created the first man Lulu, whose eternal tasks are to release the gods' burdens from labor, and to provide continuous food and drinks for worship. To show their gratitude towards Marduk, the Anunnaki created a temple called Babylon. Here they built Isogil, a shrine where the gods can dwell in. After the completion of the shrine, they celebrated with a banquet where rules, regulations, and divisions of their stations of heaven and the netherworld are established. 50 of the great gods then assembled and took an oath granting Marduk's kingship. They proclaimed Marduk's 50 names, the highlights and praises his accomplishments, starting with Marduk, the savior of the gods.
So now switching over to our presentation. These are some of the gods and goddesses that appear in Enuma Elish. The 7 tablets describe the creation of the world. It touches upon the themes of a struggle for power, evident with the fight between Marduk and Tiamat and Ea killing Apsu. Additionally, it explains the creation of man, who serves the deity, and a long passage praising Marduk.
So moving on to connect the Enuma Elish with Genesis. So the book of Genesis is the first book of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Old Testament. During the 19th century, archaeologists discovered thousands of clay tablets, 7 of which contain the Babylonian creation story, aka the Enuma Elish. Since this discovery, many scholars have questioned whether or not the authors of Genesis 1 had drew inspiration from this creation story.
Some similarities between them include certain Hebrew words in Genesis 1 are linguistically related to the Enuma Elish. Each work begins by describing primeval chaos and darkness, and there's also a division of the upper and lower waters. The sequence of creation is also similar. In the Enuma Elish, man is created by Marduk, a 6th generation god, and in Genesis 1, God creates man on the 6th day.
Although these similarities suggest the book of Genesis may be based on the Enuma Elish, there are still differences that set them apart. Most creation stories have the same exact thematic connections like primeval chaos, but it is expressed in different ways to reflect the beliefs, knowledge, and culture of each society. This can also be observed in other stories like The Great Flood or Cinderella, where stories have the same plots and themes but are different when told by different cultures.
Moving on to Enuma Elish and science, as we examine, many of those Cinderella stories often uphold similar themes, specifically the weak characteristics of Cinderella contrasting the bold, strong character of Prince Charming. This also includes the same damsel in distress archetype that, despite having such varying origins, similar to these stories, creation stories across many human civilizations often uphold similar concepts. We'll explore some of these through the Enuma Elish and the Big Bang Theory. First being life began with absolute nothingness. For the creation story, there was only chaos between Aspu and Tiamat, and this nothingness is also present in the Big Bang Theory. However, everything suddenly came to be when two beings collided. This comes in the form of Aspu and Tiamat bonding together to form younger gods. In the Big Bang Theory, it comes in the form of two atoms colliding to form the universe we know today. This then produced smaller life forms, which further collided and combined together to form the rest of the universe. But the question is, why is it so repetitive? Upon closer examination, we could see how these creation stories are so similar because at the end of the day, these stories are created for the people. And the needs always revolved around questioning and finding answers about the world around them with the knowledge they had at hand. From the clouds to the rivers to the constellations, these creation stories attempted to find closure.
And by studying the Enuma Elish and other clay tablets, scholars have been able to discover the incredible astronomical and mathematical achievements of the Babylonians. For instance, Babylonian astronomers and mathematicians were able to calculate how far the planet Jupiter traveled from the time it appeared in the sky to the position it would reach 60 days later. Their understanding of geometry allowed them to be able to calculate the area of trapezoids, which were used to symbolize the planet's motion. This is relevant to them because Jupiter was a celestial manifestation of their patron god Marduk, and they wanted to be able to better understand his divine will so that they could protect grain harvests and other important events. And in the Enuma Elish, we also see evidence that the Babylonians had knowledge and understanding of the lunar calendar, which refers to any dating system that is based on a year consisting of the synodic months, aka the phases of the moon. In tablet 5 of the Enuma Elish, Marduk sets up the year, the months, the weeks, and even the course that is taken by the moon. For instance, it is stated that on the 7th day, the crown would be half size. Not only is this factual, but they also use this information about the celestial bodies to predict human fate. And although this lunar calendar is only used by certain religious groups today, like the Jewish calendar, the Western calendar that we do use still has its roots in the system. Specifically, we owe the concept of the year, the month, and the day to these great Mesopotamian astronomers. With that, we will now be moving on to our quiz. So as we go through the questions, feel free to just type in like the letter of the corresponding answer in the chat.
So question 1, what does Marduk do with the 11 monsters? Yes, it is B.
Okay, so question 2. Which one is not one of Tiamat's monstrous creations? Yeah, let's see, the phoenix.
All right, so question 3, how were the constellations created? Oh, I'm so sorry, I was muted. The answer is actually A.
Question 4, why was the first man Lulu created? Yeah, the answer is D.
Question 5, what was established at the banquet? The answer is D, division of sanctions between heaven and the netherworld. And thank you. That'll be all.
Bam, now that is perfect timing. Great job, guys. All right, we're ready for team 5.
Hi guys, so today we will be presenting about the Hawaiian creation myths. We chose this Hawaiian culture because it's not widely known by everyone, and the closest popular representation of it was the Disney movie Moana, which could be seen as a misinterpretation. So today we'll be speaking about the two creation stories from the Hawaiian myths and making connections to share more about the culture.
So in the first story, next slide, please. So in the beginning, there was only endless darkness. From that darkness, the two beings were born, the male Kumulipo, whose name means the essence of darkness, and the female Poele, whose name means darkness itself. They gave birth to all the creatures who live in total darkness, the shellfish that live at the very bottom of the ocean floor, the plants that grow during the dark of night, and the grubs that burrow in the earth. And as these creatures were born, the darkness became slightly lighter. Next slide. So the first beings gave birth to the male Pululi, whose name means deep darkness, and the female Poehiwehi, whose name means darkness with a little light. This couple created all the creatures of the almost darkness. They created the fish that swim in the deep seas and the land creatures that live in almost darkness. These dark creatures had offspring, and with every new life, the deep darkness of this world got a little brighter. Next slide, please. The second couple gave birth to a third, the male Poelele, whose name means night, and the female Pohaha, whose name means coming into dawn. These two created the creatures of darkness near dawn, the insects that fly by night, the caterpillar and the grasshopper, and a large egg. The egg hatched into thousands of birds. These were the birds that fly and sing in the hours just before dawn. The fish, the birds, and the insects all had offspring. Each new creature added some light to the darkness until it was getting closer to the light that we have in the hours before dawn. Next slide. Next to be born were Popanopano and Polaloehi, who gave birth to sea turtles, lobsters, and other shellfish who lived in the shallow waters in near darkness. They gave birth to the male Pohilo and the female Poneaku. Their names mean night ending. They produced the rat Poli and Kamapua the pig, both creatures of day and night. By this time it was almost dawn, and the earth was already buzzing with life from so many creatures. These two created the first dawn, and light finally came to the world. Next slide, please. So the first man, Ki, and the first woman, Laila, were born. They were both dark since they were both born just at dawn. The first man and first woman had many children. With each generation, their skins became lighter and lighter until they became the color that they are now. And that is the first creation story.
So to explain our art piece, we decided to explain the first creation story with each rectangle representing the 5 stages of how the world came to be. So the dark to yellow filter over the entire thing basically represents how in the beginning of the world there was complete darkness, but as more animals come onto the earth, the world becomes like more light until the first humans come. And the animals themselves actually represent how the world was basically built from the bottom up, starting with ocean dwellers to the first humans. Next slide, please.
Okay, so there was another creation story that we're going to talk about. So in the beginning, there was only a void, and the god of creation Kane came in and he threw a tree, which was called a calabash. The tree broke into 2 pieces, and the curved piece became the sky, and then the seeds that came out of it were the stars, and the part that was left became the earth. Next slide. Ranji was the god of the sky, Papa was the goddess of the earth, and they came together to create the chief, and the future chiefs would be descended from this union. Next slide. Each of the gods was given a task to do for the chief by Kane. Kane filled the earth with all the living things. Ku was in charge of growing coal wood and candlenut in the forest, and Lono was in charge of growing food and plants for the chief to eat. Kane told the gods to find something to make the great chief, and they found a red clay, which is why he was called Red Earth, and he would rule over the earth, and it was believed that future humans would be great warriors and chiefs.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about my connection to the first story that Jonathan was talking about. So first, I want to connect it to Christianity. There are many parallels in all religions, and Christianity has a parallel in Hawaiian culture. Both reflect day and night, creatures, humans being born after a state of nothingness that we keep seeing in all these things, all these religions. Ki and Laila are also parallels to the famous Adam and Eve. They were both the first humans on Earth. And they were created after all the creatures were created. Another thing is nothing is original. As we see in myth class, absolutely nothing is original. Things repeat itself all the time. And many religions have similar storylines. Things happen, they're not really original, right? It's versions of the same story. So which one is real? Well, that is up to you. Next slide.
And I'll be looking at connections from the second story. There are more motifs between different religions and cultures rather than direct comparisons. So the first thing I have is Po and chaos. We've talked about that. The Hawaiian word for chaos is Po. And it seems that every creation story opens with some variation of nothingness. And in both the Big Bang and the Hawaiian creation story, the second one, Po is broken by force. And what I mean by in the Big Bang, we know that there's a giant combustion. And with Po in the second creation story, Kane actually forces himself out of the chaos to break himself free, kind of. And then he breaks out Lono and Ku, which then leads to my second point, which is hierarchy. In the Hawaiian religion, there's Kane at the top, and then Kono and Ku and Lono, and then they create the rest of the gods. And then the rest of the gods are then tasked to serve the chief, and then they create the first human who is now going to rule over the next hierarchy of people. We've seen hierarchical structures in Eurasian feudal systems, as well as the caste system in India. And then my last point is a divine ruler. As we know, the first Hawaiian man was created from red clay, and he was to rule over the rest of the people. And just like in Egyptian culture, and just like in, I believe, Chinese culture, the ruler is the direct descendant from the god. And in this case, since Kane made him, and they actually made this ruler to reflect Kane in human form, he had a direct spiritual connection to the gods, which led to him becoming the ruler.
So now we will go over a Kahoot. I actually made it so that everyone can do it independently. We sent the link in the chat, so I'll give you guys like a minute to do it, and then we'll go over the questions.
Since no one's playing the Kahoot song, do you guys want me to play it? I feel like it will boost morale. Let's go, guys.
So we only have a minute left, so I'll just go over each of the questions. So the first question, what did the names of the second couple, Puliuli and Powehiwehi, mean? Puliuli's name meant deep darkness, and Powehiwehi's name meant darkness with a little light. This is because with each couple, the day progresses and it gets brighter over time. This couple creates all the creatures of the utmost darkness. For the second question, why were the first humans in the first creation story both dark? The first humans' names were Ki'i and La'ila'a, and they were both dark because they were both born at dawn. As the sun slowly came out, each generation became lighter and lighter. Number three, the first humans created in the second creation story was named the Great Chief. This was actually false. His name was actually Red Earthman, even though he was actually supposed to be the chief. For four, which is not one of the connections made to the second creation story? The one not for the second creation story was evolution. Everything we connected to Big Bang, hierarchy, and divine rulers. For number five, who was the Red Earth Man's parents?
I'm sorry, it is at 9:56.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Good, Team 6, all you.
All right, I'm sorry, 1 second.
Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're group 6 and we're going over the Egyptian creation story. Switch sides. And we're going to start with gods and goddesses and end with the quiz. Okay.
So for our background for gods and goddesses, much of, like other cultures, much of what was known about unexplained in the world was explained through gods and goddesses, which helped ancient Egyptians understand their surroundings. And one unique thing about gods and goddesses was their appearance. And unlike other cultures who had like spirits or humans, they had a combination of a human body and an animal face, which is definitely unique and something that was never seen. And in the human world, the pharaoh was the closest thing to the gods, and someone is considered to be a god on earth. And he was like the link between the two worlds, so he was like heavily praised. And just how Greeks had their family values and gods, Egyptians also had that, and everything in life that made life possible is symbolized by god or goddess. So some of the gods, next slide. Some of the gods we have was on, you can see in the picture all the humans' bodies and the animal faces. And some of the gods we have are Amun-Ra, Osiris, Anubis, Ptah, and Set. Amun-Ra was the main god, like the Zeus of Egyptians, and he was a combination of Amun and Ra. Amun was the creator god of the universe, and Ra was the god of the sun and light, and he was the chief protector of the pharaoh. Other gods like Osiris and Anubis were important because of their role in afterlife and their role in the environment. Osiris helped the afterlife souls find the afterlife and have a better living after, because afterlife was heavily praised. And he also helped with vegetation. And Anubis helped lost souls and helpless. Ptah was the creator god, and he was said to give life to everything on the earth after it was created, and he was said to create all the gods himself. And Seth was one of the evil gods, and just an example of violence and disorder and how family relations can really just mess up society. Next slide. Some of the other gods we have are Horus, Hathor, Thoth, Sekhmet, and Geb. Out of these, Horus was probably the most important because he was a god of the sky, war, protection, and light. And he was known for the Eye of Horus, which was supposed to be the origin story of how people in Egyptian society came to be and in the world came to be. Thoth and Geb were also important because Thoth was responsible for mastery and calculations and math and science, and helped the Egyptians progress humanity and God knowledge. Geb was the god of earth and the father of snakes, and he helped in crops, so he's important in agriculture and economy and just helping the Egyptians survive. And Hathor and Sekhmet were like lower gods, but still Hathor helped with women in pregnancy and childbirth, and Sekhmet was a goddess of war and healing, and she protected during war and helped the pharaoh.
So there are several accounts of the Egyptian creation story, and they're from either the Pyramid Text or the Book of the Dead. All of them start with the universe beginning as these dark, shapeless waters called Nun, and Nun essentially is invisible, it's infinite, and it's a lack of direction. So similar to other creation stories, it's this nothing darkness that is present. Next slide. So Atum creates himself out of Nun, and there are also several accounts on how he does this, either through sheer willpower or he's sprouted from a lotus flower. But Atum is the creator god. He's also, it's another name for Amun-Ra. So he is tasked with keeping the balance of creation and or Ma'at. And at the first time, he creates his children Shu and Tefnut to aid him in keeping this balance. Shu and Tefnut separate the sky and water, making Geb and Nut, and Geb and Nut go on to make more gods and the beauty of the natural world, such as rain and flowers. Seth, Osiris, Nephthys, and Isis are their children, and they complete the main creation gods, which also helps to further this balance of creation. So the creation of humanity comes from Atum's all-knowing eye. When the eye sheds tears, the tears are the first humans. That's what they transform into.
And there are also several accounts on how this happens. But the one I want to focus on is that the Shu and Tefnut go missing, and Atum sends the eye after his children. And when they are returned, the tears are shed, and that's when humans are created. And the purpose of humanity in Egyptian creation, like all other creation stories, is to serve as the stewards of Earth, and they're to serve the gods and help keep the natural balance of Ma'at.
Okay, so the 3D model that I created here depicts the world as the way the ancient Egyptians saw it. So it illustrates three main deities, Shu, Nut, and Geb. So Nut is shown as a woman whose body stretches across the heavens and is adorned with stars. Her limbs are the pillars that hold up the heavens. Geb is the god of the earth, and he's shown laying down, reclined on one arm with leaves on his body, which symbolizes the hills and the valleys. And Shu is the god of the air, and he separates his children, Nut and Geb, while forming the Earth's atmosphere. And if he's ever removed from the separation, then chaos would fall in the universe. And this tiny video that I have here basically shows how I created this model.
So many connections can be drawn between the Egyptian creation story and modern day, notably in science, philosophy, and religion. In modern day, we use science to explain natural things like the earth, sky, moon, air, etc. And in the Egyptian creation story, they use deities to explain these things. This story is also connected to modern philosophy, as parts of the story indicate that they viewed things similarly to how we do today, like justice and the symbolism of the night. For example, their deity of moist corrosive air was also their deity of justice, and by linking the two, it shows they're viewing justice in a similar environment to how we do today, because when justice is decided, there's usually a tense environment and stifling air, which is what moist corrosive air is, and these are interesting associations that we might make today. And the story of the night also shows a connection. The sun deity was tired and went into the sky, creating night and leaving the moon to protect humanity. And this seems symbolic to how night is viewed as a time for the tired to rest and be safe, which could have influenced how the story forms and is like similar to how we view night today. And it also connects to modern religion in that the creation story shows a clear, prominent, major deity, and many modern religions have the same, and it connects order, disorder, and justice to a higher power. And this is similar to some modern religions. For example, in Christianity, you could say that original sin would be disorder and reconciliation would be justice, and those are both devised by a higher power. And also the all-seeing eye shows a connection because it shows they believe that their higher power was all-seeing and could affect human life, which many modern religions also believe. And the eye also shows a connection in its creation of in humans. The eye created humans through its tears, and some modern creation myths are similar. For example, the story of Adam and Eve, humanity was created from sadness as well, in their case, the sadness of punishment.
So everyone get on the Kahoot right now that I posted in the chat, and everyone should be able to do it independently.
The bell just rang, Miss Fusaro.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Guys, amazing job. I know you were crunched for time, but you did great despite all of it. Have a wonderful day. Take care. And as I said, I'm recording this, so I will post it back up because I'm going to ask you guys to just respond to it. You'll see. Have a great day. Bye, guys.
Have a nice
Have
day.
a great day,
Bye.
Ms. Fusaro.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Mr.